Good morning, and I'd like to thank you for once again joining us here at the Greenbrier Church Online. One of the interesting things about our makeup as humans is that we all have what we call personality triggers. These are little triggers or things that we do subconsciously that reveal what's going on in our mind. It can be anything from tapping our foot when we're annoyed to clicking a pen when we're impatient, or what my wife affectionately calls the Hauk grunt, where we hear something we don't particularly want to deal with and we, ugh. When we worked in Nashville, we had a great church secretary. She was simply amazing. She could type faster than I could talk. She was extremely organized, and she very rarely complained about anything. But she did have a trigger. When she had to do something that she thought was difficult or unpleasant, she'd sigh. She had to make a call she didn't want to make, she would sigh. Or when certain folks came by the church building just to hang out in the office and chat, she would sigh. The copy machine would get jammed, she would sigh. The remarkable thing is that she never picked up on it. She would sigh, and we would ask her what was going on, and she would use that as an opportunity to explain some difficulty that she was facing. I got to thinking about her, and specifically her ability to sigh, as I approached our text today, because it's a difficult text. And not necessarily is it harder to follow than anything that's come before it in this X-rated sermon. It's just that we haven't done a really good job with this part of the text. Actually, we've used it to hurt people and to drive them away, the very people that Jesus is calling to come to him. As we start this morning, I want to start with three quick stories about what I'm talking about. Story one. I know of a man who grew up in our fellowship, and he was an active member of the church, but things at his home weren't that good. Actually, he and his wife were constantly arguing and fighting with one another, and there were a few times where they had gotten physical with one another. So he believed that his best option was, when the house next door came up for sale, for him to buy it and to furnish it and to move into that house away from his wife. And they lived the rest of their lives in separate homes, living separate lives, truly believing that since they didn't get a divorce, they were following the commands of Jesus in this X-rated sermon. Story two. A family of the congregation became friends with another family at the ball field. They invited their new friends to come join them at church, and after a few weeks, this new couple gave their lives to Christ. They became members of the body, active members. And they were actively involved in the life of the church for 17 months until one day, casually, the man mentioned his first wife. He explained that when he was 18 years old, he was briefly married to a woman for a few months, but they were both very immature and very quickly divorced. 4 years later, he met his current wife, and they had been happily married now for 12 years with two beautiful children. But the leaders of that congregation told them that he had to end his current marriage, break up that family, and go back to his first wife, or they all had to leave the church. The leaders of that congregation fully believed they were following the teaching of Jesus in this X-rated sermon. Story three. Back in March of 2006, our country was rocked when we learned that a minister's wife shot and killed her husband while he slept. I've actually heard people teach that the blood of Christ can cleanse you from every single sin you commit except adultery. Have we really twisted the words of Christ to the point that we believe that we can get forgiveness for murder and not divorce? You see, our community is filled with people who have been deeply wounded by broken marriages. The topic of divorce is clearly a painful and pressing issue for so many people. We have members of our own church body that have been through divorce and who are now enjoying a healthy, thriving marriage. And yet, as many of you heard the scripture reading this morning, you sighed. You've had people, some even in your very family, that have used this passage as a way to shame you, or worse, to condemn you. And you already know that any discussion that this text is going to bring up memories and feelings that you want to forget. I told you that I sighed when I read this text. One reason that I struggle with this text is because, unfortunately, I have a history. You see, there was a time in my life when I saw the Bible as merely a tool to be used to shame people into acting the way I thought Christians were supposed to act. That still haunts me. And on the other hand, I want to be honest with the text. I believe that Jesus thought that this was important enough to include in our X-rated sermon, so we can't just ignore the passage or skip over it no matter how badly we want to. But we also have to be very careful here because we don't want to make a difficult passage more difficult. We can't allow our bias or our culture to interpret the scripture. Because every time that we've done that, we become guilty of using the teachings of Christ to condemn and to add to the pain and the weight of our current struggles. I mentioned when we started this series that there's this beautiful order that Jesus is using as he's preaching here. Every time we talked about the Beatitudes, we noticed it. I said, you can't be pure in the spirit, then you'll never be a peacemaker. There's such a beautiful flow to this sermon that Jesus is preaching on the side of this mountain, and our passage is no different. You might remember Jesus talked about righteousness in the law. He wanted us to know that having a pure heart is so much more difficult than having pure actions. You see, oftentimes I can control my outward actions enough to fool you. But if you ever saw into our hearts, well, you would see something quite different. Building on that point, Jesus begins to talk about our struggle with anger. He talks about how our anger causes us to feel superior to the people around us that we are very quick to devalue. And when we give into our anger, we treat the people created in the image of God with contempt and disrespect. I told you 2 weeks ago that having a right relationship with God can never be separated from having a right relationship with people created in his image. Last week, we noticed what Jesus said about lust. And I mentioned that our problem is that we quit seeing other people as a soul created in the image of God, and we start seeing them as an object used merely for our gratification. I tried to give you the mustard seed that things are not to be loved, things are to be used, and the opposite of that is true as well. People are never to be used, they're to be loved. Our text this morning, this difficult text, is sandwiched between Jesus' teaching about lust and his teaching about integrity. And I might be stating the obvious when I point out that if people knew how to control their lustful desires and were committed to complete integrity and truth-telling, there would be fewer, if any, divorces. You see, divorce is often the result of someone allowing lust and lies to grow up like weeds that choke out the beautiful plan of marriage. As long as your selfishness causes you to be preoccupied with only your needs, then everyone else, including your spouse, becomes merely another object to fulfill those needs. And once you strip your spouse of their humanity, whenever they stop fulfilling your needs, it's easy to just throw her away or throw him away and find you another one. That's the heart disease that Jesus is addressing in this text. Okay, let me see if I can explain it a different way. Earlier this year, I had to take my truck to the shop. I'd had that truck for 19 years, and it was the only vehicle my kids had ever remembered me driving. But over the past few years, the truck started having issues, as old trucks often do. The mechanic told me that the turbo was shot, and he told me what it would take to fix it, and I had to make a decision. Do I want to spend the time and the money to fix a truck that I enjoyed, or do I want to go out and get a new truck? Well, on my way home, I stopped at the car lot and I began looking at new trucks. And that makes perfect sense because my truck is a thing, it's an object. Our problem is when we choose to make people disposable like old trucks. Eventually, we're going to get to the point that we don't want to spend the time to fix what's broken in that relationship, so we just trade our old spouse for a new one. The struggle that God has with divorce is that mankind has made the decision to objectify people. We treat others as things that can be replaced and not someone created in the image of God. I know we read in Scripture that God hates divorce, but do you know we never read in Scripture that God hates divorced people? God hates the idea that a man or a woman would simply walk away from their spouse in the morning and find themselves in the arms of someone else by nightfall. God hates it when we choose to be selfish or unreasonable or sinful. Too many times we've been guilty of cherry picking out of the Bible what Jesus says. And when we take his words out of the larger context, we often cause irreparable damage. There are two passages in Matthew's gospel where Jesus addresses this topic. Once here in the Sermon on the Mount, and then he's going to answer the Pharisees' question in Matthew chapter 19. In both passages, Jesus tries to fix our misunderstanding of God's law by contrasting the religious cultural view and God's original intent. In this teaching specifically, Jesus is working through the prevailing religious teachings found in Deuteronomy chapter 24. So let's look at that original passage and get a baseline. We read, if a man marries a woman who becomes displeasing to him because he finds something indecent about her, he writes her a certificate of divorce. He gives it to her and sends her from his house. And if after she leaves his house, she becomes the wife of another man, and her second husband dislikes her and writes her a certificate of divorce, gives it to her and sends her from his house, or if he dies, then the first husband who divorced her is not allowed to marry her again after she has been defiled. That would be detestable in the eyes of the Lord. So Jesus is having this conversation because he's trying to deal with the contention found in verse 1 where God says something indecent about her. There are two trains of thought in Jesus' day about what does it mean to be indecent, and it all depends on the rabbi that you followed. The rabbis who were trained under Rabbi Shemaiah said that the expression something indecent refers to a gross, scandalous sin. It referred only to adultery or prostitution. Now that's the conservative view of the text, but it's not the only view of the text. There was another rabbi, Rabbi Hillel, who said the expression something indecent could mean, well, basically anything that you wanted it to mean. He would teach that if your wife was indecent, if she spoiled your dinner by adding too much salt, that it was indecent if your wife were seen in public with her head uncovered, or if she talked to another man in the street. He taught it was indecent if your wife was disrespectful to your parents, or if she became plain looking compared to another woman who you thought was more beautiful. So according to Rabbi Hillel, the definition of being indecent was if your wife did anything that made her less pleasing in your eyes. This view basically taught that your wife is nothing more than an object. She solely existed to meet your needs, and at any time that you wanted to trade her in for a newer, better, prettier model, all you had to do was give her a piece of paper and you could have a brand new truck. I mean, you could have a brand new wife before the sun went down because she was just an object. Does it surprise you that that was the most popular interpretation of the day? I'm sure you understand why Jesus would take exception to that interpretation. He's preaching the sermon in an effort to expose our unrighteousness. In other words, Jesus is intentionally preaching this message to people who are either guilty of or the victims of abuse and the misunderstanding of the law. I understand how difficult this text and these issues are, and I'm not saying that we don't have any answers and we should just throw our hands up in the air, but we do need to tread these waters with great humility. As we prepare to make our way to the table this morning, I want to offer a few words for you. First, if you've been divorced and you have remarried, enjoy the blessings of your marriage through the grace and the mercy of God. Build your family in a godly way, and don't spend any time second guessing your decision to marry. It'll drive you nuts, it'll create more problems than you can solve, and it will add weight that God doesn't intend for you to carry. Secondly, regardless of what you've been taught or what you believe, God doesn't brand a D on the foreheads of divorced people. He doesn't force you to wear a scarlet A on your clothes. Religion does that, and religion kills. A divorced person is not a second-class Christian. A divorced Christian is a forgiven Christian. If you're married, you need to understand that your husband or your wife is a gift from God. They're not perfect, but neither are you. You both wake up in the morning with bad breath. You both mistakenly leave a cup or a glass on the counter. You both, in a moment of anger, have said something you didn't really mean and you can never take back. We need to remember that God calls us to love our neighbor as ourselves, and that also includes your spouse. Your husband or your wife is a gift from God, and they should be treated as a treasure, not an object. And finally, and I need you to hear this, the only unpardonable sin is the sin of refusing grace. Every one of us is guilty of sin, and it's only when you are willing to confess your guilt and your brokenness that you come to a place where Jesus can pour out his forgiveness and the grace that healing brings. Here's a reality that you might not want to acknowledge. The truth is that we're really all adulterers. If you're offended by that statement, it's probably because you're unaware of your own sin. We read in James chapter 4, verse 3, you adulterers, don't you realize that friendship with the world makes you an enemy of God? James is pretty clear that we've committed spiritual adultery. We've cheated on Jesus with materialism. And Jesus knew it. And yet he still invites us to come and to take a seat at his table. Jesus knew that we would choose the world over him, and he still offers us grace. Jesus knew that we would ignore his love, and he still offers mercy. That's why we have to go to the table every week. We need to be reminded that Jesus died for every sin that we will ever commit or every sin that we have ever committed against him. And so as we gather at the table this morning, there's a couple things that we need to remember, a couple things that we need to ask. First, when has grace meant the most to you? That's an important question for us because it draws us back to this question, to this idea that we're not perfect. We have made mistakes, and yet God still loves us and still pours out his mercy and his grace in our lives. We have treated people with disdain. We have treated people as objects merely to bring us pleasure or joy. And God says he's willing to forgive us of that. So when is the grace of God meant the most to you? And secondly, we need to ask ourselves the question, what can we do to treasure the people who are closest to us? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, body, and strength. The second is like the first. Love your neighbor. And we can take out the word neighbor and we can put in, love your husband. Love your wife as you love yourself. God created mankind as the crowning achievement of all creation. We are more important. You are more important than things. You are a treasure. We all are. And God is calling us to treat our brothers and our sisters, but more importantly, our husbands and our wives as treasures in our lives. And so this morning, as we gather at the table, we need to think about what kind of relationships do we have? And are the relationships that we have been blessed with, are they worthy? Are they worth our time, our talent, our energy to fix, to get them right? Because your marriage is a great gift from God. Let's not spoil the gift by misusing it. Let's enjoy all the benefits and all the wonder of the gift by treasuring it as God treasures us, his children. I hope you have a wonderful time of discussion around the table this morning. And it is my hope and my prayer that this week you will begin to look for ways to love and to treasure your husband, your wife, your spouse, and one another. I want you to go in peace this week and know that you're loved and that you're deeply cared for. I long for the time that we can all come back together. But until then, know that you are in our prayers and in our thoughts. We love you deeply, and we hope that you have a great week. Go in peace, and God bless.